Good afternoon and welcome to what is the last Creative Sensemaker Live of 2020, with thanks to our partners Santander. I'm Matt Dancona, I'm an editor and partner at Tortoise, and one of my great professional pleasures is to edit the weekly Creative Sensemaker newsletter, which we produce every Thursday. It sort of started out as a kind of emergency culture kit during the first phase of lockdown, and it's grown happily into part of the Tortoise universe, I'm delighted to say, and all the better for the help and ideas and recommendations we get from members and friends of Tortoise. In which spirit I really hope you'll join in today with your thoughts about what lies ahead, what you're looking forward to in culture and entertainment in 2021. It's been a very hard, bleak year. We're not out of the woods, but what I'm hoping we can do today is mainly focus on the things that we are looking forward to with excitement and optimism. Will we get to see bands live again? Will the movie houses reopen? Will the new Bond film be released before next Christmas? We don't know. But here to help us with that and much else are two superb speakers. Pam Hutchinson, who's simply one of the best writers about film working today, Tortoise contributor, and very relevant to the moment, curator of the BFI South Bank's amazing Dietrich season. And I think I'm right that the classic Jimmy Stewart Dietrich movie, Destry Rides Again, is on tonight at the NFT. So if you are around and you can, go and see it, it's incredible. And with her, another great friend and collaborator of Tortoise, Ciro Romano, who's a legend on the music festival scene in this and other countries, and responsible for the brilliant Love Supreme Festival and Nocturnes Live at Blenheim, and also, as you may know, in partnership with Tortoise on the KITE Festival project. So do join in on the chat. My colleague Ella Hill is running that, and if you'd like to make a point, do flag it up there, and I'd love to bring you in because there is a lot to look forward to. In what form exactly, we don't know, but I'm hoping that Pam and Ciro can kick us off. So Pam, I'd like to, if I may, start with you, and just sort of, before we get to the how, just look at the what and ask what movies, both popular and art house, you are looking forward to in 21.
Okay, well, all eyes are on Daniel Craig, because if No Time to Die does come out in April 2021, not only will we have the fun of a new Bond film, but you know that's a big vote of confidence in the UK cinemas and the UK film industry, and this could be a real make or break moment. So I am far more excited about James Bond than I usually am at this time, but there are some really exciting things out in the beginning of the year that we know are good, that have been at the festivals, such as they are this year. So I really want everyone to look out for Nomadland in February, which stars Frances McDormand. It's by a wonderful American indie director called Chloe Zhao, and it's about poverty in the American West. It's kind of a modern Western in that way, and really fantastically performance from Frances McDormand. And as we go through, we've got the new Francis Lee film Ammonite, which is a wonderful romance, and we've got things like Supernova with Colin Firth and Stanley Tucci. So there's lots to look forward to, and there's lots of really interesting films that have just about got around to finding their release schedule at the moment. Well, we'll get into this, but we really have to work out how we're going to see these films and whether they're going to keep their place.
Question, but before we go on to that, just a couple more I wanted to just sort of test your excitement levels on. One is the another adaptation after the famous David Lynch effort at Frank Herbert's Dune is coming out. Denis Villeneuve's trying his hand at it. What do you think about that?
I mean, this is obviously the big film that has been put back and put back. We were expecting to see it at Christmas, at the last we heard. It's not coming out now until October, and it's got Timothée Chalamet. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. Denis Villeneuve, we know he's going to give us a spectacle. This should be a fantastic film. Obviously, such big, ambitious films can sometimes flop, and Warner Brothers are obviously quite concerned about Dune with the way that they've put it back, but also we now know that Warner Brothers have got this plan in place for the US only, where everything that comes out in the cinemas is also going to come out to stream on HBO Max. They want to make sure that there isn't anyone in America who can't see Dune if they want to, because You know, the studios are really scared about these films now, you know, that you wouldn't have made June if you knew a pandemic was coming, basically. So yeah, I mean, I just want to see Timothée Chalamet in a big action spectacle. That's what I want to see, but I also want to see people turn up at the cinema to watch it.
Well, absolutely, and I mean that sort of segues nicely into the next question, which is, you know, as I hope people have been able to see in the file, we've been running a file this week at Tortoise, edited by Peter Hoskin, called Year of the Screen, which has really been about how, you know, we've spent more time streaming, we've been more time on Zoom, certainly, locked into our watching, experiencing things like the George Floyd murder, on which were captured by phone. Everything seems to have sort of converged on the screen. But the one screen that has obviously suffered is the silver screen. And there's a very good piece, which I would really commend to you if you haven't read it yet, by the director Carol Morley in the file today, about the perils facing the movies and the big screen in general. And I suppose the question, Pam, is, I mean, what in practice needs to happen to get the cinemas back to a point where they can be running at something like normal pace? Because it seems to me to be two elements. I mean, one is the fact that the biggest chain in the UK, Cineworld, is in trouble anyway and has said it can't open again until March at the earliest. And then obviously COVID, you know, what constitutes COVID secured? Is it levels of vaccination, or is it levels of vaccination and social distancing? And at what level does it become economic for the main distributors to sort of get back to a regular levels of distribution?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say that yes, Carol Morley's piece is fantastic, and I do recommend people read it. She really evokes what's so special about the cinema experience in that piece. There are sort of two things that need to happen. You know, one thing is that the current exhibition model in this country, how we distribute films and how we run them and screen them, is based on these idea of tentpole blockbusters. So if you have June, or you have No Time to Die, or you have Black Widow, that will sort of pay for showing smaller things, and it keeps the cinemas going. You know, even a local art house cinema can have these slightly bigger films, and you know, and because these are the films that people see that coming out, they get excited and they go on the first weekend. The die-hard fans are there on Friday morning, and then everyone else sees them over the next couple of weekends because they're in the news. When things stream, even if you get the big films coming out, you lose that impetus a little bit. So the film industry sort of needs to work out how they can make things sustainable without relying only on blockbusters, and that's something that they have not had time enough to do. We just have a backlog of blockbusters, which sounds like a ridiculous thing. It's like this content is too good to be shared, is basically what Warner Brothers said. I think also people do need to get more confident. I mean, I'm incredibly privileged, you know, in my job. I've been able to go to film festivals and press screenings, and I've been back to public screenings, and every cinema I've been to, there's been social distancing, there's been people wearing masks. It is obviously as safe as it can be, but people are nervous and people are losing the habit of going to the cinema. It's just another thing that seems to be unnecessary in a difficult year. So, you know, there's a feeling from many people in the film industry that if someone could just jump first, if you could bring out No Time to Die or Black Widow or something, and just get people excited about the idea of getting back into the cinema, we might be able to revitalize everything. I mean, you know, and I appreciate it's so wonderful. It's such a boon to be able to watch things at home. You know, how many people watched Charlie Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things this year? A really difficult art horror film, basically. But, you know, it's a fascinating film, and it was on Netflix, so it's accessible to pretty much everyone. The other thing that I'm slightly concerned about this future of streaming compared with the cinema, it's not so much just about people losing money, but as a consumer, as you know, the rest of us normal people, we've got to decide which platform to sign up to. You know, I'm sure many people watching this have got a few logins for Disney Plus or Amazon Prime, all great channels, but you can't get everything in one place. So we'll have a kind of, you know, you'll have to sign up. If you want Marvel, you have to sign up to Disney. And are you then going to also sign up to HBO Max to get the DC films as well? So we might find a little bit of a sort of a platform wars in our future, which is not going to be helpful for anyone.
No, and I suppose I'm old-fashioned enough to think that, you know, a lot of movies are just meant to be experienced in the cinema. I mean, I went last week to see Mank and then watched it again, the new David Fincher film about the origins of the Citizen Kane screenplay and then watched it on Netflix, and it's like watching two separate things, as you'd expect. The kind of the sweep, the cinematography of the film, and in fact the performances are just different and better on screen. So it does concern me that people won't have that experience as much, and we've become used, I think, in 2022 to the experience of seeing new films on the small screen, which is just fundamentally different.
Yeah, I mean, the absolute best thing I did in 2020 was buy a projector for my house. So I've been streaming things like Mank and all small screen films, as it were, streamable films. I've been watching them on my living room wall. It might not be exactly the local Odeon, but it's what I'm doing. And I've been streaming concerts that way too. It's not quite the same, but it's slightly better than squinting at my computer.
I should say that in the words of a politician, I misspoke, and it's actually my brilliant colleague Xavier Greenwood in the chat. So apologies for that, Zav. And do please chip in as you are, everyone. I want to hear what you have to say, and we'll come to you very shortly. Ciro, let's sort of do an equivalent exercise with you in the field of music. In 2021, looking ahead, what are you, on the live front and the recorded front, what are you looking forward to, assuming, you know, an optimal outcome, as it were?
Well, I'd say, not being specific in the first instance, just being able to go out to watch live music generally is something I'm looking forward to. One of my favorite things especially is to go like late night jazz clubs, going for supper or going out to see a bigger show, and then maybe going to Ronnie Scott's about midnight and bumping into people I know. And that whole essence of the community of live music is something that I am really looking forward to doing again. More specifically, I'd say Bjork at Blue Dot, I'm really looking forward to. I went to that festival last year. It's a festival of science and music, and up in the Northwest. I'm really looking forward to that. Duran Duran at BST, which is a great bill with Grace Jones and Nile Rodgers, I'm really looking forward to. And a lot of younger artists coming through, Arlo Parks, Fergus McCready Trio, lots of artists that I'd wanted to see this year but couldn't, I'm looking forward to. And on recorded music, Lorde, who I'm a big fan of, is releasing an album next year, which I'm really looking forward to. And also Arlo Parks, who's the artist I mentioned earlier. She's got a new record coming out in January. And Celeste, who won, I think it was the BBC Sound of last year. Her album's coming out in February, which I've heard, which is great. So they're the things that I'm looking forward to. That's
not a bad shopping list, actually. So I suppose then we get to the crunchy question, which is the musical counterpart to what I asked Pam, which is what needs to happen to get gigs and in particular interest in the festival scene up and running between now and say spring or the summer?
Well, before I answer that, one interesting thing that's happened over the last 3 or 4 weeks, because our festivals, we had effectively mothballed them to next year and rebooked as many artists as possible. And we've actually been on sale for the last 6 months. We just haven't been selling any tickets. But in the last 3 weeks, I've really noticed that we've started selling tickets again without doing any advertising, without any marketing. So for the festivals next summer, I think we're up 500% in 3 weeks. That sounds a lot, but
no, I understand. No,
but it's very, very encouraging that people are starting to feel that the general public's starting to feel that festivals will happen next year. So I think I'm optimistic about that. I can't stress enough the importance of the announcement that Glastonbury will be making in January as to whether they're going ahead or not. I think that if they announce that they are going ahead, the optimism will flow through the whole industry, and it will give everybody a strong feeling. I think it's immensely important that they announce early on that they are going ahead, and I think that will give everyone a lot of confidence. And I know that one of the reasons I know it's potentially going to happen is because they're already in conversations with the BBC about the live coverage. So that's in terms of confidence. In terms of what needs to happen, well, if social distancing exists, then we can't do it. It's just not commercially feasible for us. And I would say that's the most important thing. Now, what drives that, whether it's the vaccine or whether it's testing, I don't know yet. But that in and of itself is the main thing that stops live events happening. So I think getting, whether it's, I mean, Chris Whitty said, did Chris Whitty say that by spring he didn't think that that would exist anymore, or that the form in which it exists at the moment won't exist? So I think that if that is removed, of course we'll have lots of other protections that we'll need to put in place, but social distancing in and of itself, you can't have a festival.
No, sure.
Yeah, it's number one.
Guessing that the vaccination announcement was the trigger for the uptick in sales, would that be right?
Yeah, it was the vaccination announcement. So since then, and it's actually got stronger every day, we seem to be selling more and more tickets. So that was really important, much more than test and trace, much more than anything to do with testing. So, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I'm hearing from what I've read that by May and June, the majority of the country should be vaccinated. I don't know what everybody else is hearing, but that's what I'm hearing. The big question for festivals.
Yes, I think if the rollout works as planned, then that's more than feasible. Yeah, absolutely.
The big question for a lot of festivals, some festivals sell out right away, but the majority don't, and it's a war of attrition throughout the year where the campaign effectively lasts for 10 months. The big question will be whether a lot of festivals have enough of a runway to sell the tickets, because if it takes longer and longer and longer for the confidence to come back and for the green light to appear, a lot of festivals won't have the time that they need to sell the tickets. And they'll have to sell them in a very condensed period of time. The other big issue, which is relevant for my festival, which we're very US artist heavy, is whether US artists will come to Europe next summer. And you know, I'd say 9 of the last 10 headliners at Love Supreme have been from the US. I'd say 67% of our Nocturne headliners are from the US. Both our KITE headliners, which we've not announced yet, are from the US. So that's potentially a big issue, because if they don't come, then the market for UK-based artists will explode. You know, if we can go ahead with the festival, but US artists aren't coming over, which will then increase the price of the UK artists because of scarcity value.
So in that sense, it really does. I mean, it seems to me there are two big determinants. I mean, one is a sort of Bank of England style announcement from Glastonbury to add confidence to the market. Yeah. And then some level of public health policy completion that means that the festivals can get back in business. Is that sort of fair summary of where we are?
But that has to be, that public policy announcement has to be in time, it can't just arrive before the festival, because at that stage, you know, Glastonbury announces early because it's got the longest lead time for production. So it needs to start in February effectively. We start 6 to 8 weeks out in terms of committing significant production costs. You know, it's very expensive to put together. So all these elements need to come together in time so that we can market properly, start the production process again a couple of months in advance. So I'm still unsure about it, but I'm more confident than I was, say, 4 to 6 weeks ago.
I'm glad the trajectory is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I come to my colleague Phoebe Davis. Phoebe, are you there? Hi, Phoebe. Good to see you. What are you looking forward to in 2021 on the sort of creative cultural front?
Well, so I was very lucky and I got Glastonbury tickets. So hearing the announcements are at Glastonbury, but that was in fact the first year I've managed to get Glastonbury tickets, which was a bit of a difficult one to find the announcement. So I was just chatting as well about clearly one of the artists that's done really well this year is Taylor Swift. She's released another album today. It's 2 feature albums in 2 months. That's not a small feat, working with The National, working with Haim, and there's been some fantastic female artists this year. I've got tickets for Bon Iver, The National, that have all been massively delayed already, so looking forward to that. But in terms of films, I feel like Ammonite, I went to see the Ammonite screening at the BFI, and it was absolutely beautiful, and there's some really fantastic films that came out, but I think there was a really good point made about fear in the cinema. Even then, in a Curzon, so, you know, independent, smaller cinema, and lots of social distancing, it still felt like people felt a bit anxious. They didn't want to come near you. It was table service. So I had to sit at my table to order popcorn, but there was only one person serving the popcorn. It just didn't feel quite the same. So I'm kind of hoping that those cinemas can operate more easier, at least, and don't feel that kind of same strain. You know, there's not the same kind of table service and systems set up as they do in, let's say, a pub or a restaurant. They don't have those capabilities. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for next year.
And one of the things that I think is underrated in all of this is expense, which is that actually going to the movies is now quite an expensive outing. Whereas, you know, streaming is, it's not pain-free, but certainly the idea of subscribing on a monthly basis is not quite as painful. And I just wonder whether there's a generational thing here, which is that, you know, the movies really have, the cinema industry has a real challenge to keep young people turning up at the movie houses, because people my age have been going to movies since, you know, the 1860s, and, you know, it's part of our DNA. But so it won't take a huge amount to get us back, I think. But, you know, the digital generations, plural now, you know, for whom streaming is second nature, I wonder just how big an ask it is to get you back to the cinema as much as is needed to really make the cinema business a viable one.
Well, I think, I don't know if I completely agree, because I think and I know that my circle of friends is perhaps those who love film, but, you know, most of my friends use apps like Letterboxd to review films. If you don't use Letterboxd, it's fantastic. It's like Tinder, but for films. You can swipe through them. It's a really great way to look at them. I can see Pamela laughing. So that's fantastic. And also, I think I like streaming, but I miss that tactile, tangible going to the cinema. And you can see it because, you know, cinemas like Everyman, cinemas like Curzon have nice wine, have nice food, rather than just getting some vaguely stale nachos. You get hummus and pita and wine and like the whole experience of it. You have sofas. So what they've done is trying to make that a better experience. So, and, you know, and I think as well, there's lots of cinemas that do really good programs for students, that do those kind of big film festivals, and they really are better at that. When I went to university in Sheffield, they had a really, really good system. There was loads of great films you could go see as a student, and they'd run programs. So I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think a large chunk of people who go for the blockbusters, I think it's kind of hard because, you know, there's that reliance on the Marvel films, Star Wars films, and those big pools still. But I think there's still space for those independent films, and there's still space for those kind of narrower, the films like Ammonite, you know, with Kate Winslet is now, you know, doing that instead of doing Titanic. You know, there is space to do that. And, you know, Saoirse Ronan has a huge pool, Timothée Chalamet, people will spend a lot of money to go see the next Wes Anderson. So I'm kind of hopeful that doesn't happen, and we want to go back to cinemas just as much as anyone who went to the cinema 50 years ago.
Well, that absolutely gladdens my heart, because you know, movies don't have a future without the young going to see them. So that's great news. I really, really am thrilled to hear that. I wonder if we could. Can I just go back? Actually, could we go to Martin Ricks next? If Martin, are you there? Hi, Martin. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Tell us, because you've been saying some fascinating things in the chat. What's your take on the year ahead? Are you optimistic or still feeling a bit a bit concerned about the prospects for culture?
Well, my bank statement would say I'm optimistic, because I've been purchasing tickets for things, even if I don't think they're going to go ahead. I've got some tickets for Tim Burgess, Fontaine's DC. We did have some for Nick Cave, but he's actually cancelled his tour.
That is very sad. I had tickets too for that. So,
but if I'm honest, I'm not entirely convinced anything will really change much before June, July. I just think I've not got full confidence that the vaccine rollout will be completed by then. And I think particularly with festivals, when you look at who actually goes to festivals, kind of the age ranges, actually, it's those that are at the bottom of the list to get vaccines, as opposed to the more the elder generations. So yeah, maybe June, July. So I think, as was being said, you know, the leading times for the bigger festivals like Glastonbury, maybe it'll be too tight. I don't know. But my other concern really is we've got some other big things happening in the next month and a half. You know, we've got Brexit, we've got a potential economic hit there, and I'm in a fortunate position. I'm a civil servant, so I'm not going to have like an economic hit in the same way as a lot of people. But will they able to afford nearly £200 for a festival ticket to some of the festivals? Will that expendable cash be there to be able to go to the cinema as much as they used to be able to go to as many gigs? And I think that's something that we have to think about. It's not just the economic impact of COVID, but also Brexit. And with that, the touring as well. Just because we've got a vaccine rollout doesn't mean everyone's going to have it by the summer. And is it, as I think it was mentioned before, is it going to be economically viable for tours to take place just in the UK and not across the EU, for example?
What do you think as a punter constitutes COVID safety at a festival or a gig? I mean, let's say you talk about vaccine rollout, but it's true that obviously it may not be rolled out as quickly as we all hope, but there's a scenario, isn't there, where actually the only people who haven't had the vaccine are those who are young, and you know, my children have had it, neither had significant symptoms, and you know, if I'm 52, so if I've had it by then, it doesn't matter if they give it to me, so to speak, they can't. So the question is, we don't have to reach 100% capacity on vaccines to envisage a situation where gigs and festivals could go ahead without it necessarily being a public health crisis, I would imagine.
I agree. I think this all comes back to the fact that this is a global pandemic, and it's not just a festival taking place in the UK and those people then that have been in that festival aren't then going to get on a plane a few months later, and other people from other countries aren't going to come to those tours, or those bands aren't going to tour elsewhere. So there's someone at my door. We have to think about that, the fact that life isn't going to return to normal in that sense. People are still going to want to travel afterwards. So actually, are you able to have lots of people who haven't had the vaccination in the same place, some of whom are then going to want to go to France or go to Germany or go to the US? And will they be able to do that? Is it a choice people are going to have to make? And if it's a choice, if it was me and I said to my wife, oh, I'm going to go to Glastonbury, we're not going to go on holiday this year as a result, I know what she'd tell me I'd have to do. But I'd like to think that we have got solutions for everything before we can be certain that those big events are going to take place again.
No, I'm sure that we're not there yet. Thanks very much, Martin. Can I turn to my colleague Nimo Amer, who's, I think, he's on the call. Nimo, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hey, good to see you. So Nimo, what you wrote a brilliant piece as part of our Year of the Screen file, and I know also played an important part in editing it. So tell us your thoughts for sort of what lies ahead in 2021.
Well, I'm not entirely sure what lies ahead. I can tell you what I hope.
That's good enough.
But yeah, I definitely think that I'm really excited to get back to live music, just because there's literally there's no alternative to it. You can't really stream live music, and it's just not the same. I don't think there will ever be a viable alternative than just going somewhere and like experiencing, watching these bands and musicians play live. But like with the cinema, like I said in the chat, it's like streaming is just not the same, but it's close enough. Like I can watch the same film that I'd watch in the cinema, and I can have all the snacks that I want in the world, and I can try and make the atmosphere kind of adjacent and make myself as comfortable as possible. Yeah. But I can't wait to get back to the cinema. I've really missed it, but I was also saying in the chat, I lived in Manchester before the pandemic happened, and I used to go to the cinema several times a month just because I could, just because tickets were so cheap, and I was like, why not? Like it's right there. I'd be supporting the local cinema, and it was just great. But since moving to London, I know that cinema tickets are a lot more expensive here. Yeah, so that Vim to go and just see what's on and pick something, even if I've never even heard of it, and see what I think, it's just not possible anymore, because I feel like cinema is definitely pricing people out in London a little bit. It definitely has priced me out. I definitely won't be doing the same thing as I used to, but I'm definitely really excited to see just any film, all the films. I just want to get back to the cinema. Like, I just want to.
Any particular movie you've heard about that you're looking forward to, or?
I can't remember what it was called. Was it called American Skin by Spike Lee?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's supposed to come out in a couple of months, which looked very controversial and a bit crazy, but quite excited to see that. And the Timothée Chalamet film as well. I'm very, very excited to see that. And just, yeah, like I said, frankly, just like the atmosphere of being in the cinema and watching something on a big screen, and like not being in a world where all this pandemic and Brexit and everything's happening. I miss that deeply, and I kind of can't wait to get back to it.
Couldn't agree with you more. Thanks so much, Nima. I wonder if Jerry Wisniewski's available. I don't know if you're around, Jerry.
I am. I don't know if you can see me though.
Yes, we can. Hi. Good to see you, Jerry. You
be kind.
You made some very interesting points in the chat about the which I think is a really interesting and important point about the difference of cinema experience in and outside of London. And well, rather than me paraphrase you, why don't you make the point? Because they're very interesting.
I do wonder where we are all coming at this from a perspective of having exposure to some really great cinema experiences. I'm not talking about the content of the films themselves, but if you go to cinemas that are outside, some of the nice ones people have mentioned, BFI and Curzon and Everyman and others, you know, all ones I've been to, they're brilliant. But then the experience for most people outside of these big cities where there's independent cinemas, they're terrible. They're usually in some horrible kind of business type park, which has been underdeveloped. You go in and it's very sparse. There's hardly people there. I know some of this is to do with, you know, affordability too. People have said that, but they're not inspiring experiences for people. So I do wonder if cinemas need to work harder to inspire audiences to use those spaces and think of them differently. They've got massive footprint. They're huge footprint of spaces, and yet vastly unused. And I do wonder, a bit like, you know, people have talked about libraries and being different kinds of spaces for entrepreneurship or creativity. I do wonder if cinemas need to reimagine themselves.
And what, I mean, do you have any specifics in mind? Because usually when cinemas think about reimagining themselves, they gentrify themselves with they become more expensive. They invest in, you know, carrot cake and very nice wine and so on. And that's nice for those that can afford it, but it may not necessarily make the cinema more inclusive.
Yeah, and I wish I had the answers for it, but I mean, in some of these towns, you've got, yeah, high unemployment, youth unemployment, people not now in education or training. You know, can those be more creative spaces? I don't know, but I think someone made a good point. You know, the studios have to be on board with this as well. You know, it's sort of a collective effort that needs to be taken to address it, because they should be rich cultural spaces for people, and they're not quite living up to that.
Well, they obviously have I mean, the extent to which it seems to be binary at the moment for most of the cinema chains, which is that they're either shuttered or completely open, which suggests that their model is not nimble in a world where they're going to have to be, which is very interesting. But I'm sure you're right. I wanted to thanks very much, Jerry. I wanted to come back to Pam briefly, and just, I mean, Pam, you know, do you see, I mean, it's very interesting to look at cinema as a whole, and to, I mean, to Jerry's point, to look at the way in which cinemas might respond to changing, not just changes in the audience, but changes in culture generally. So we've had a period where, you know, as you mentioned earlier, the whole movie ecosphere has been dominated by tentpole franchise blockbusters and cineplexes that sort of operate on economies of scale and cross subsidy. So there are three screens showing Avengers 19, and then maybe a couple of screens showing other films. And I have to say, the pre-pandemic, I thought that was quite a good model because it enabled sort of movie cineast types to go and see their films and then also go and see the blockbusters and so on. But our movie house is going to have to go even a step further in there, and also to Jerry's point, are the studios going to have to respond?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd just like to say that I'm reeling from Phoebe telling me that I'm actually on Tinder now because I'm a keen Letterboxd user, and that has just blown my small mind away. I think Jerry made some excellent points, and I think that, you know, when you talk about Avengers 19, clearly going to be the best film in the franchise, you know, it should be like a can of Coke. It should be that if Avengers 19 is playing at your local cinema, you can go and you can have exactly the same experience as the Los Angeles Critics or the premiere. It is just a movie and you have a space to watch it. We all know that multiplexes have been letting us down, and people have been saying, well, I would wait to watch it on streaming. And now that these theatrical windows are closing, people are going to have that opportunity. So I think that what is probably going to have to happen is that the multiplexes are going to have to raise their game, especially if they can't guarantee to have the same number of tentpoles a year. And, you know, when we're thinking about the fact that we thought we were going to see the Batman next year and it's going to be the following year, and that they keep putting off Dune and the Suicide Squad and any sequel now that just has the in front of it, you know. So I think what is probably really sadly going to happen is this is going to mean fewer cinemas. You know, fewer films, we've got fewer cinemas, we're going to have fewer punters as well. But hopefully there's a way that you can add value. I mean, I live in a very small niche of cinema where I go to festivals where people have introductions, and I'm a big fan of silent film. You know, you can't have live music in a cinema during the pandemic, or, you know, even post-pandemic. That's one thing that's completely verboten. You know, you can't have people introducing films. So all these sort of simple ways that people added value to screenings, having that kind of live element, that's been stripped away. And that is, to be fair, more of an art house kind of thing. But, you know, we're going to have to get creative. Would you go to your local cineplex if you could buy carrot cake and nice wine, or would you just go for like really comfortable seats? You know, would have to be fewer people in, you know, and would you pay for the premium price? Would you guarantee that you're going to see enough good films in comfort that it works out better economically than buying a subscription to Disney Plus and just letting the kids watch Mulan every day?
I mean, I think my tolerance of smaller screens in cineplexes may have diminished over the years. I mean, I was going back to Mank. I watched it on a really big screen, and it was great. But I do, to your point earlier, Pam, about the joy of the home projector. I do wonder sometimes whether those View Screen 19 is going to be that much better than watching it at home. Let's go now. If I may, back to Ciro. I just wanted to again sort of try and find these counterpart or the symmetries if they exist. Do you think, Ciro, that the musical ecosystem has to adapt and collaborate more than it has in terms of artists and their labels putting out music and working with the festivals moving forward into what is, whatever happens, going to be quite a difficult couple of years?
Well, the interesting thing is the music industry is really split up into generally two parts. So there's recorded music on one side and live music on the other side. And recorded music hasn't suffered at all this year. If anything, the revenues have increased, streaming revenues have increased. So I guess their appetite to work with or help, however you might define that, isn't in any way desperate. Their model has thrived effectively in the last 12 months. For live music, we are reliant on, we're a communal experience. And it's interesting, I'll answer your question, but going back to what I think Nimo was saying about you can't stream live performances. Of course you can, it's just not a very satisfying experience. And even though there have been massive technological and creative advances in the last 8 months, just in the last 8 months, I still feel that it's not really a viable business model going forward. I know from a lot of labels that they've, apart from the odd one or two, that most of them have lost money when there's been a big investment in live streaming. And I came up in the 90s when any kind of live audiovisual experience was not, there was never much of a demand for it. Matt, you'll remember when watching a TFI Friday, when the music came on, the ratings would go down. During the DVD boom in the 90s, I worked at Polygram, and the DVD sales for live concerts were always very, very low. So there's not a huge enthusiasm, I don't think, from the general public to watch live music on a computer screen or on TV. You might say, well, Glastonbury is very popular on iPlayer, but they tend to condense it into one or two songs for each show, so it's easily digestible when you're watching television. So I think for us, there's not really, I agree with Nimo earlier, there's not really a substitute for live music. It is a communal experience, and that's why by the way, I'm hopeful for cinema as well, because I think cinema can also be a communal experience as well, like going with your friends, your wife, your girlfriend. So I'm hopeful for cinema, but for us, it's a communal experience. If anything, the one part of the record industry that's suffering because of what's happening to us is breaking new artists.
Yeah.
In the sense that they need us to break new artists. They need those festival slots. They need promoters to take risks early on. So that's the one part of the record industry that's suffering at the moment. Another interesting statistic is that, that when I was started in the music industry in the 90s, catalog was about 40 or 45% of the record companies' income. It's now 75% of their income, and that's mostly due to people streaming old songs on Spotify and Apple. So, sorry, what was your question?
Well, you've kind of answered it in the sense that I suppose what I'm trying to work out is to a certain extent where the power lies, and I think you've answered in this sense that you know, we grew up in a world in which people bought records or DVD or CDs, you know, so on. That we've now moved to a streaming model, and bands and acts, both for A&R but also for continued revenues, need a very lively, you know, aggressively marketed live sector to make a living, let alone, you know, lots of money. And therefore, it's in everyone's interest in the music business that the festival promoters and indeed those who, you know, have venues and put on gigs are able to get back as soon as possible. And I suppose what I was wondering was, you know, the music business full stop needs live music now, doesn't it, to an extent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost impossible unless you're in electronic and dance music to break a new act without live, especially festivals.
Yeah.
I mean, another interesting stat is that the concert and festival business used to be about 50-50 of income, and it's now about 70-30.
Yeah.
In festivals' favor, not favor, but so we effectively generate 70% of the booking agent's revenue every year. So that 4-month, June, July, August, September, it's a bit like Q4 in the retail trade. It's huge.
Thanks, Sarah. Could we come to Barney Dufton now? Barney, you were making a very intriguing point in the chat about the way in which people were using, I think, YouTube streaming. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of been one of those forced technological advancements where stuff that was being hinted at has been rapidly accelerated. And I think from the live music perspective, I think that certain artists have really kind of very quickly stepped up to create something really creative, really interesting. I mean, I totally agree with Ciro in that it's never going to be a replacement, and B, financially it doesn't stack up. But I think that now that technology exists, that it will form part of a band's campaign. It will be utilized as a great example was the Biffy Clyro album launch. They did this really cinematic live performance, which was bundled into part of a pre-order for the album. So that's a bit of a marketing activity. I think there's been a few, because I'm a sort of horrendous metalhead, there's been in that kind of world there's been a lot of usage of there was a band called Code Orange, who I'm a big fan of, but they had their record release show was in March and got cancelled a few days before it was due to take place. They had all the production in because it was a big show, so they just streamed it straight onto Twitch. So there's all these platforms and these abilities to utilize them, while they may not be, like, once again, like Ciro says, completely financially viable. I think that using them as a marketing tool, an event tool, and potentially also, as I said in my comment, you know, I remember really vividly going to see Fleabag being streamed, the kind of National Theatre Cinecast. If you want to, there's the potential to create events around marrying this new way of presenting live music in a way that is, it doesn't need to be compared to a live experience because it's presented in a different way, but you could also work that with that kind of cinecasting and cinema as well.
Do you, and it's interesting, Bunny, obviously you know of what you speak, and I'm interested in what you think about the notion of hybrid everything, because as we've sort of, you know, much of 2020, everyone assumed they were going to be locked up for the foreseeable future. Now, as things look a little bit brighter, it's hybrid this, hybrid that. What does that really mean? I mean, you know, does it mean that we'll live for a period of time in a world where some of us will stay at home and watch things live streamed, and others will go out, ditto streaming versus movies, and then we might slowly edge back to a more live-based culture? Or do you think actually that the mixed economy is the future CAPF?
I mean, I think kind of your guess is as good as mine on that. I think that the big thing with the sort of the hybrid events is that ultimately they only ever happen in sort of one location. So you've effectively condensed a campaign's worth of touring into one event. So that's going to really affect the artist, definitely. I mean, it's a tough one, really, because I don't really know is a short answer, to be perfectly honest. I think that those hybrid events they kind of fulfill that idea of, you know, you having that atmosphere, you having those people in the room, so it's that can slightly kind of bleed through the screen a little bit. But I think in terms of more as seeing it as an opportunity for when things are returned to create something that is almost a completely separate idea, I think. And do you think it will, I mean, I suppose the question I'm grasping for is, will people be satisfied by the digital experience? I mean, are we witnessing a cultural shift where, in fact, you know, those of us who were brought up on, you know, going to the Marquee and going to Ali Pali and going to, you know, there's still a sense of resistance. You know, I love watching, you know, Glastonbury was mentioned earlier. Yes, I love watching highlights of it on the, but I wish I was there. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's more about what is actually being created and streamed. If you're trying to do a literally, you know, 5 people on a stage with a camera straight onto it, then that's not going to do it. But if you are utilizing the tools that having a digital, that creating something in a more controlled space than an arena or a pub or, you know, the Borderline or wherever, that are you creating something that's new and that's different and that's interesting, and that you have the ability to utilize different sets of tools. I think if you can, rather than it trying to be a replacement, trying to make it something fresh, then I think that's the kind of the way that it would work as a kind of piece of like cultural content.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Manny. Can we come to William Jeremy now? Hi, William. How are you?
I'm okay.
What are you looking forward to in 2021?
Well, I just wanted to make a general point. Perhaps this sounds a bit over optimistic, even Panglossian, but in a way, the very denial of all the things we've been talking about, access to live music, the collective of cinema, has reinforced how important to our collective mental health and general well-being arts and culture is. And I think hopefully there'll be such a tremendous thirst to make live experiences work again. I can offer an anecdote from the world of big budget filming, because I do a bit of extra work with various agencies, and I did a day on Fantastic Beasts back in November before Johnny Depp did his thing. And what the big companies have been doing since for the last couple of months is testing everybody that moves on set. And of course, that's a huge expense. And one might think, well, they can kind of afford it. But I'm just thinking that because there will have to be a workaround of some kind, we'll all have to work on how that's going to look. But the general point is that there's a great big thirst out there that must be met in some way. And I think creativity and imagination, and also maybe we also have to think how lucky we've been in the past with the access we've all had. And it's reimagining a bit what that might look like, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It's very true as well. And I dearly hope you're right. Is Yasmin around? Because Yasmin, you're making some very interesting points in the. Hi, Yasmin. How are you? Good to see you. What do you tell us your thoughts about culture in?
Internet connection is a bit dodgy, so if I fall out,
we can hear you. Oh, it's breaking up a bit.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now. Yeah.
So I get a lot of my income from doing.
You're breaking up again. Sorry about that, Yasmin. We'll try and come back to you. Can I? While we're trying to get back to Yasmin, can I go back to Pam? One question I wanted to ask Pam and didn't earlier is that, which actually was, I was reminded of it by my colleague Flistamir, who asked a really good question in the chat, which was, are we headed for holograms in cinemas? And I did want to ask you what you think. You know, will we have more CGI or less, more holographic experience or less, more VR or less? I mean, are we going back to basics or heading towards even more super high tech?
Well, you know, this is where I sort of put my film historian hat on. And, you know, the biggest disruption that I can think of ever in the film industry was the coming of sound, which was followed quite swiftly by the Great Depression. And there were two ways of tackling it. You know, famously, the Warner Brothers strategy was politically engaged, cheaply made cinema shot on the streets, you know, what shots where it looked like it was on the streets. And then, of course, you have the MGM version, you know, you have the big spectacle. You know, I think that obviously they're just two separate strategies which probably different filmmakers will go for. I think that there's interest in VR at the moment, but when it comes to more CGI, I think we are beginning to see the limits of CGI. The one set of blockbusters that's definitely been put back and back and back, and you're not hearing anything about now, is that big slate of Avatar sequels. I think that people have reached a kind of limit of how much.
What have happened to them? Where are they? Because you're very plugged. You're as plugged in as anyone I know in the movie world. Where did they go? Have they gone into some portal in space time?
People are just not talking. The studio's not talking about them anymore. I mean, they're obviously being made. They must be in production. There's like three of them, I think.
At least, yeah.
But I think that they've become a bit of a joke, the number of sequels, the sort of grand folly of the original film. And I just think it's something that people don't really have a hunger for. I have a feeling that people really want that sort of human thing. If you look at, say, the Batman trailer, you just think, well, they're going for the sort of Joker model, a superhero film that looks like a real film. And I think that that's what we're going to crave. We've all seen a lot of internet connections and pixelated faces recently. I think what we want is real humans on screen, and it's absolutely true. What's the one thing that everyone's missed in 2020? And it's human contact. So I think, I think CGI will always be with us, but I don't think the kind of CGI as the heart of the film is the thing that people are craving right now.
I'm sure you're right that Marvel will have to do better than spending $300 million on the world's most expensive Zoom call. I think it's actually in an example of cross-sharing, Ciro wanted to ask you a question. Ciro.
Hello. I think we need to.
Oh yeah, hi Pam.
There you go.
So I was curious as when you were talking about movies being moved into 2021. I think if I'm right, Tenet was the only really big movie released into cinemas this year. Was that perceived to be a success? That was Warner's, right? Was that perceived to be or a failure? I wasn't quite sure.
The idea was that, you've got a big budget film, you've got a great, well-loved director, you've got stars, it was going to save cinema. I mean, it's too much hype to put on any film ever, but the idea was that it would save cinema, and it spectacularly failed to do that. It did quite well. Some of the reviews were good, some of them weren't. I personally wasn't a huge fan of that film. And I think people are very shy. If you look at the films that came out this year, a lot of the films, even the ones that came out in cinemas, lots of great films came out, small films, independent films directed by a lot of women, actually, that, people sort of threw away, you might say. The problem with the big releases is, I was thinking about it when you were talking about people buying tickets for gigs. I've got tickets for gigs next year. It's kind of an act of faith. It's hard to buy a ticket for Bond in advance. You could book a ticket for a film festival, but that's quite a niche occupation. So they have to be absolutely certain if you're going to release a day and date across the whole world, that it's going to make money. And Tenet did not make anyone feel comfortable about that.
So you think that was the catalyst for all those other films being moved into 2021?
I mean, it just didn't stop that parade. I mean, that's the thing, it was, all this started in March when they put back Bond, and, nothing, only Tenet has jumped since. I mean, there's Wonder Woman, but that's going to stream as well on Christmas Day. And Soul, which is the new Pixar film, is going to stream as well. As I say, Mulan did. So no one is banking on solely the cinema experience anymore. We wait to see.
I can't thank you all enough. We've sadly reached the top of the hour. And so we'll have to draw to a close the last Creative Sensemaker of the year. But it's not the last Creative Sensemaker live by any means, because we will be back on Friday, 29th of January. Of course, our think-ins in general will have resumed long before then, but the Creative Sensemaker Live will be back on the 29th of Jan with a discussion of the great book comeback. How come books did as well as they did do in 2020, and how come that's going to be sustained? And with that in mind, if you still have gifts to buy, or if you just want to buy books, or for any other reason, do check out our Tortoise bookstore, which we've recently opened. We're thrilled with it. It's a means of buying books online, but assisting the independent bookstore sector as well, and ensuring that Amazon doesn't just have basically a monopoly of the world's book selling. And so we're very, very pleased with that. Please do check it out. I think there's Zav's just put a link up in the chat. Go and take a look and tell us what you think. Thanks very much to Santander, our partners, for this. And thanks to all of you, because I leave with my heart much more optimistic than even before. Pam and Ciro have given us an expert's eye view of where we are, with quite a lot of optimism etched in. And it was really good to hear people it was good to hear Phoebe and Nimo speaking so positively about getting back to the movies, getting back to gigs, the appetite that there is for that. But also to hear Jerry talking about ways in which the cinemas need to change the experience and make it more inclusive, which is, I think, a really good point and one to which we should return. On that note, thank you all for your time and your energy and your ideas. And I wish you all a very happy Christmas and see you soon, and see you, I hope, on January the 29th. Good afternoon.